If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we continue to unravel the mysteries behind the origins, motives, and cultures of the 16 ghostly guilds in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the Sandmen Guild and their Phantasm Arcanos. Good evening, dear explorer. Nice to see you so prompt and early and... Oh, I'm running late? Well, kick the dog and call me Sally. You're right. 1,000 apologies to you. I have no decent excuse for it. I have just felt rather sluggish all day. Barely any sleep. Working on fumes, as they say. A couple of weird dreams kept me up last night. Nothing awful, nothing that constitutes a nightmare or bad dream. Just strange. It makes you wonder whether the Sandmen were involved somehow. Oh, you may scoff at the notion, thinking of the 19th century tale with the same name, or the piece of Scandinavian folklore before it. The closest any of us puny humans have ever come to truly entering the underworld is through our dreams and our nightmares. As the subconscious floats and plays away in another realm so very close to the Shadowlands, certain wraiths can work their will upon them. These wraiths are the Sandmen, both belonging to the guild of the same name and those that are well versed in the Arcanos called Phantasm. Much like its mortal definition, Phantasm is a product of fantasy, the Arcanos of dreams and illusions. A Sandman or person or woman can tell how long a mortal is in their sleep cycle and gently hold a sleeper's soul without harm or rip it straight from the body, causing much damage to the sleeper in the process. We believe the latter is harder than the former, which makes sense. It usually takes more effort to be a nasty piece of work than it is to be gentle and nice. Some studies have shown that mortals brought into the Shadowlands appear in particularly solid forms. They cannot be harmed in this state unless it is by a special artifact or anything else that would cause serious aggravating wounds to a wraith. The attacked dreamer returns to their body, slipping through the tempest unharmed. Only the most powerful Sandmen can permanently harm or kill mortals in their sleep. Of course, most malicious uses of Phantasm generate angst. As you can work out, the Arcanos is particularly useful for communicating and manipulating mortals and wraiths alike. Remember that ghosts sleep too, via slumbering in their fetter. A vivid dream can inspire or frighten one into new behaviors, altering their dreams however they please. Naturally, if things go wrong, pleasant experiences become far more horrific and vice versa. It's rather fortunate that those who intend to inflict harm are in the minority. They certainly don't dress like it. Gossamer attires are the common ones, so fine silky attires, airy-fairy sort of things. Rather than made from spiders, this gossamer is woven from wisps of previously inhabited dreams. Many Sandmen belonging to the guild are said to perform many an overdramatic mannerism and bearing. Similar to how working with angst and the shadow stains the partners, so does the dreams of the others on the Sandmen. Only here, it is more a screen or some wet blanket of dream matter. It starts out small, like small scents, before evolving into said screen. Some of the schools within the guild adopt emblems or symbols that have special meanings for them. The school of Gigorno, or however it's pronounced, are said to paint a red circle around their eye, whether it's actual paint or blood, whilst the dream liturgies use the traditional comic tragic masks associated with theatre. Don't worry if these two groups don't mean anything to you for now, for there is much to learn about the Sandmen before this point. We should really start at the beginning, as per all of our discussions. The origins of the Sandmen stem from nomadic mystics that lacked guilds. Not until the advent of Christianity, oracles, tribal leaders, priests, priestesses, seers, and prophets from several different Western cultures, chiefs among them the Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and Hebrew peoples. Whilst their cultures differed wildly, what connected these elite spirits was their understanding and appreciation of the importance of dreams and reality in much the same manner, a touch on humanity's inner being. It's believed that Phantasm evolved from the interests given power in the Shadowlands. These nomads do not trust those who don't share their opinions and were therefore not trusted by other races and the proto-guild of the time. This is the main reason why they operated by themselves, existing solely as messengers with the living. The Sandmen would come from later Roman and Greek cultures, would provide a more artistic approach to the guild and much needed secrecy. The first major shift in the Sandmen gaining some true structure would come during the first Great Maelstrom, where it is revealed that spectres had learnt the basics of the art of phantasm. Before the Maelstrom, it was believed that spectres' ability to dream was siphoned off by oblivion, which rarely touched the dreams of Wraith at this point in the underworld history. What actually occurred was that these spectres were those who had fallen to harrowings or oblivion, which was just as many Wraiths witnessed. Sandmen responded in fear, banding together to monitor the teaching of Phantasm, ensuring that the greatest secrets were not carried into oblivion. This, of course, was the beginning of the guild proper. As times changed and people developed, fewer individuals believed in spirits and the elder gods of old. Whilst the guild's eldest members positioned themselves into more religious leadership roles, the more contemporary Sandmen focused more on the roles of the underworld during the beginning of Christianity, dreams that could be used to heal, communicate, and inspire other spirits to greater callings. The reason of this is what they believed the mortals were under the guidance of protection of God. His priest, bishops, and pope did not want this blasphemous whisperings of those beyond the veil. Many Sandmen that attempted to contact the mortals of the Dark and Middle Ages found themselves cast in the roles of demon and incubi, come to rob sleepers of their faith and test their purity. They were no longer the sweet angels of yesteryear. The Sandmen Guild were more or less solitary, aware the likes of the artificers, proctors, pardoners, and solicitors were forming and squabbling. The Sandmen were said to keep to themselves, other than the roles they were already filling. This was said to change when the Nomori drew the Sandmen into the War of the Guilds in 1207, which had already been going for some 200 years. The Nomori revealed Charon's plan to replace Stygia's stages with artificer forges, which obviously rustled their feathers. The artificers in turn ran off many of the Sandmen's clients and contacts, which led many Sandmen to follow more renegade ideologies. Most, however, supported the hierarchy or their heretics, right up until the Renaissance period of our history, where there was an influx of renegade Sandmen. Those with hierarchy and heretic affiliation lost their influence, as did the shift in darkening and appreciating dreams. The younger Wraiths did not want to value dreams as a political and religious tool, but more as one as an artistic expression, which, I must add, is a very fitting idea for the time period. Anyway, it was these renegade Sandmen who were tired of the War of the Guilds, especially as the Sandmen were amongst the last to enter the war. You know that this was a feeling felt across many of the guilds, but the reputation of the Sandmen were among some of the most damaged by the artificers. As a result, the Sandmen were amongst the first to sign the Compact of the Guilds in 1354. With the war out of the way, the Sandmen began to return to their roots of dealing directly with the dreams within the underworld. The younger members did as their forebears did, using their powers to create fantastic plays and shows to move wraiths. These presentations evolved into the Oniric theatre, which became one of the most valued and appreciated art forms among wraiths even to this day. It did not take long for the Sandmen to rub shoulders from the most wealthy and influential bodies in Stygian society, and thus a staple across the Dark Kingdom of Iron, at least in their esteemed courtrooms. These Sandmen became prima donnas, making more ridiculous demands and requests by the day, lapping up their newfound fame and appreciation. Whilst their patrons, for lack of a better word, had their patience tested, there were many who realized that these Sandmen could easily mask up assassination attempts with their tricks. When their patrons disowned them, it furthered the Sandmen's cause to fight in the revolt of the guilds, and we all know how that went. Ow, my hand. Anyway, the Sandmen wouldn't care too much for the breaking of the guild, but they would perform for a pittance rather than the tens of thousands of oboli. Their reputation with the renegades further damaged the guild, but the Sandmen would focus their loyalty towards the hierarchy. However, the grudges carried on into the 19th century as the hierarchy continued to tarnish the Sandmen, who responded back in the only way they knew how, with a show! They would put on performances that mocked the Dreadlords and Charon, which were all very successful and popular, creating the strange conflict known as the War of Proscenium. Attempts to shut down the war were all for naught, as the renegades retreated to the underground and continued to act out their blasphemous plays for the living as well for the dead. They also focused on bringing mortals into the Shadowlands to show them what awaited them in death. This carried on for about half a century across the Dark Kingdom of Iron and Obsidian, the Shadowlands of the US of A. The hierarchy had their own performers to counter these claims. By the 1900s, the hierarchy grew tired of these persecutions and gave up, as the Sandmen created more trouble for every means they came up with to bring them down. The Sandmen cautiously returned to public stages, some as genuine entertainers, whilst others continued their work to undermine the hierarchy. During the World Wars, particularly the Second, circles of Sandmen would fight against spectres, intercepting their own phantasm attempts whose goals were to encourage the Nazis in their genocides. Whilst the guild were concerned they would receive the blame, for which many did, their efforts during the Great Maelstroms gained them plenty of respect for a few decades. During these more modern times, the guild is still very much filled with playwrights that trope across the underworld, travelling from one necropolis to another, with entertainers and performers aplenty. A stereotype may be, but they do exist for a reason, you know. Our latest research shows that the hierarchy make up the smallest minority in the guild, with the heretics and renegades exceeding that. Many Sandmen believe that dreaming is closely related to transcendence, which essentially hierarchy propaganda. Legion guild members often serve as state-supported artists or spies and infiltrators, giving them an interesting edge to outsmart their enemy. The guild is still very much a faction-heavy one, and oh boy, there are plenty! The most famous of these are the Soma Shamans, otherwise known as the Dream Menders, using new techniques to heal mortals in their sleep by tricking the brain into accelerating the body's release of growth hormones that naturally release during one's sleep. This is obviously a violation of the Dicta Mortem, but no one has complained about it, or if they have, such moans have fallen on deaf ears. Some of the more powerful members of the guild are not really part of the Sandmen at all, but just have strong connections to them. These are special ferrymen known as the Dream Lords, and naturally have an exceptional command of phantasm, to the point they can imitate spectres and Malthians, make elaborate shows without assistance from other Sandmen, and even appear before the living without the use of embody. They are quite rare, partly due to their master illusionisms, and partly because they keep to themselves. It is possible to identify one as their eyes are said to shine within the dark, mysterious light of creation and illusion, one report claims. Dream Lords are mute and communicate only with waking dreams. I wonder if they communicate with other Dev Lords in this fashion, or something similar. You might be wondering if there are wraiths who wish to have certain needs met, certain arousing stimulations, if you would. And yes, my dear explorer, there are, and they are the dream whores, or the prima donnas, or Paphians, to use their actual name, provide all the wildest fantasies to those who seek them out in Stygia. This is legal too, an industry known as Chiripinisium, though many do work freelance, as well as unique forms of phantasm. They use moliate to transform themselves into a huge variety of beautiful forms. Some within the guild look down on them, but sex work is work in all walks of life. And unlife. The other main freelancers in the guild, with a large fraction, are the psychoneerists, or fortifiers. These sandmen attempt to drain shadows of their angst via dream roleplay, and are often considered a guild within the guild. Through illusion, reality is their motto, and they are very close with the Pardoners Guild. They have received criticism about the strength of their own shadows against others, which has resulted in many fortifiers outlawed in necropoli. You also have the Night Riders, consisting of mostly younger wraiths that use soul slipping, which is sliding a mortal soul out and as quickly as possible, as a form of a childish prank on the quick to test their dexterity with phantasm. They also perform something known as horizing or horrorizing, something akin to a nightmare, but worse. Much worse. It involves dragging a mortal soul, kicking and screaming to the nearest nihil, and dumping it ceremoniously in. Unceremonious in, I should say. There's nothing ceremonious about it. There is no skill or reason for this either, other than exercising a horrid power trip. Then there are the Night Terrors and Night Angels, who have very different roles. The Night Terrors work closely with the Proctor's Guild. The Terrors create the terrors that cause the mortal to wake up in their sleep, only to be greeted by the Proctor assuming said terror. The Night Terrors are also used as assassins to target mortals, usually those with a weakness/catch, like someone with a weak heart who would easily die from shock, or to scare mortals into compliance. If they are caught by the guild, they lose any of their benefits. In contrast, Night Angels are rare, but always in demand for their mastery of beauty's portrayal. Working in pairs, they reward mortals with beautiful imagery and feelings of peace and grace. Their services are extremely expensive, and as a result, very few Sandmen become successful at being a Night Angel. Some within the guild are hired out to lords and anacreons as plotters that do exactly as the name would imply: grow gardens. No, I'm kidding, but I'm glad you're still paying attention though. Plotters use their talents to help create Machiavellian schemes for one lord to pit against the other. They are master storycrafters and psychologists that mainly think they are only loyal to themselves, betraying both Sandmen and Stygian lords. The truth is unknown to us, but it is fair to assume it lies somewhere in the middle. There are two smaller factions that refer to themselves as schools. There is the School of Honorio, which encourage in espionage, spying, and dream-based combat, and you also have the School of Beguilement, renegades kicked out of the guild who claim to be the real guild, presenting themselves as entertainers but actually using phantasm for scams, cons, and hustles. Finally, we have playwrights, sometimes known as dramaturgists, who are probably the most welcome within the guild. Whilst there are many specialists within this faction which are far too numerous to list now, these are the Sandmen that write and perform the elaborate dream shows that constitute much of the popular entertainment in Stygia. Interestingly, they exist in different forms in other dark kingdoms of the underworld. The guild in general, I mean. Our information of those different versions are a little dated, and we have been unable to locate anything more up to date, so bear with me, dear explorer. In Swa, the Indian underworld of delights, the Ganadhavas are pretty much slaves to the Swa's regent and are forced to perform beautiful works of art, with the penalty of being smelted if they fail. Sometimes they manage to rise to more important roles, but this is rare. It is the role of the Ganadavas to make the guest stay as pleasurable as possible, making their dreams pleasant and removing any ugliness from the city they tour. Should they fail, they get their own slaves, and if they try and escape, they are murdered. Huzzah! In the Dark Kingdom of Clay, the aboriginal portion of the underworld the locals call Carter, Sandmen are very common. Phantasm is seen as a sacred extension to the dream time, as these aboriginal spirits of Carter believe that they must dissolve their fetters in order to transcend, so it is highly likely one would find a mentor to speak to the quick. In the Yellow Springs, the Dark Kingdom of Jade presents the total opposite. Phantasm is both very rare and strictly regulated by the imperial bureaucracy, meaning that the only licensed practitioners may use it to assist wraiths interested in helping living family members. In fewer words, Sandmen rework the dreams of wraiths and mortals alike to support Yo Huan, the first, last, and sole emperor of the Yellow Springs. Rebel Sandmen don't have traditions with their phantasm, but use it more as a tool of survival. Finally, there is the Bush of Ghosts, the Dark Kingdom of Ivory. Some Sandmen are Okomufu, valued members of the culture who, among other roles, communicate with the animal realms via dreams. It is fair to summarize the Sandmen as a cultured bunch who ultimately are cut from similar cloth. They are independent, highly creative, mysterious, intuitive, and incredibly self-exalting. Regardless of age and experience, Sandmen from across the underworld and eons differ little from each other, immersing themselves 100% into their roles. They have the power to break spirits, but they see that as rather Philistine. They and their power is one of subtlety and fragility. Yes, if they're good at what they do, it pays well, but the reason the Sandmen do what they do is far simpler than anything I've just said to you, dear explorer. They are passionate about their craft. They love what they do. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.